These three true disturbing Apple Airtag horror stories are inspired by real events. First, a woman tries to escape her past by driving 2,800 miles, only to get a chilling notification that proves she never left him behind. Next, a hiker's isolated trip in the deep woods becomes a terrifying game of cat and mouse, but the person hunting her is a digital ghost who's nowhere to be seen. And finally, a student's shocking ordeal ends with her stalker's arrest. Make sure you watch until the very end, because the real terror begins after he's locked in prison, when an anonymous envelope arrives at her new apartment. She drove 2,847 miles before her iPhone told her someone was watching. Sydney was running. Her whole life was stuffed into a beat-up SUV, packed tight from the floor to the roof. She was cutting a path straight from California, aiming for New York, putting a whole country between her and the past. She just needed to be gone. She needed the constant, steady sizzle of the tires on the asphalt to drown out the last 6 months of bad memories. This move was expensive. It was a desperate act. But every mile marker she passed was a small victory, a little more space between her and the man she was trying to forget. For hours on end, she had only the sound of the engine and the road. That was the soundtrack to her escape. She'd been on the road nearly non-stop, relying on cheap gas station coffee and the promise of a fresh start on the other side of the continent. By day 3, the exhaustion had settled deep into her bones, heavy and constant. It was more than just being tired. It was a deep, aching weariness that made her eyelids feel like they were weighted down. She finally pulled off the interstate into a cheap motel parking lot outside a town she couldn't remember the name of. The place was run down. A sign above her had a couple of letters dark, flickering high above her head, like a dying firefly. It made a low electric buzzing sound. The place didn't feel safe, but after 3 days in the car, it felt private. That's all she wanted. She finally cut the engine. The sudden, deep quiet of the night rushed in. The silence was only broken by the distant swoosh of tires on the main interstate, miles away. Sydney sighed, rubbing her eyes. She felt a brief moment of relief, a single, hopeful breath before the next long day of driving. She reached for her iPhone, ready to set the alarm for dawn and just pass out. That's when the screen lit up with something new. A message she didn't even know you could get. It popped up big and bright, a system warning, stark and official. Airtag found moving with you. She stared at the words. Her tired mind refused to connect them to anything real. An Airtag? She didn't own one. She read the notification 3 times. A quick, frantic search on her phone gave her the rundown. Apple was telling her that a small tracking device, one that didn't belong to her, had been silently rolling along with her. For hours, maybe for days. The first wave of fear was a slick wash of nausea that hit the back of her throat. It felt like someone had just walked right into her car. Her escape wasn't an escape at all. It was a parade. Sydney locked the car doors. The loud click from the fob echoed in the empty lot. She looked out the windshield at the rows of forgotten cars and the single low yellow security lamp struggling to light the far corner. Every instinct she had, every nerve ending, was screaming at her to get inside, to lock the deadbolt, to hide. But she couldn't. She had to know. The device was somewhere in the car, or worse, on the car. If she went inside, whoever put it there could come back and take it. They could erase the proof. She needed the physical evidence in her hand. She took the biggest, thickest flashlight she owned from the glove box and forced herself back outside. The air was heavy and still. A cold breeze picked up, rattling the dry leaves across the asphalt with a brittle, scratching sound. The sound seemed to come from everywhere. The back of her neck prickled. She checked her phone again, opening the location app. It showed the tracker's location was right on top of her. It was close. Sydney started the search in the back of the SUV. She yanked the hatch open. She pulled out suitcases, the zippers making a sharp zip sound in the quiet. She tore open duffel bags, throwing blankets and clothes onto the damp ground. She heard her own quick, shallow breaths in the sudden silence of the parking lot. Nothing. The anxiety was a tight, pressing band around her chest, making it hard to think straight. It had to be here. She threw another bag on the pavement. The sound of it landing was a dull thud. Still nothing. She moved to the driver's side. The car's undercarriage was dark, heavy with road grime from 3 states. This was the only place left. Sydney dropped to her knees. She felt the rough texture of the pavement scrape against her jeans. The ground was cold and damp. The flashlight beam cut a sharp circle into the blackness. Slowly, she followed the line of the wheel well, pushing her hand up into the muddy shadows. Her fingers brushed against thick, rubbery plastic and cold metal bolts. The area was tight, full of dirt and brake dust. It smelled like burnt rubber and old grease. She pushed harder, feeling around the tight corners near the suspension, deep inside the structure. Her fingertips closed around something small, smooth, and perfectly round, something that did not belong. She yanked her hand back fast, pulling the small white disc free. It was filthy, caked in mud, and stuck fast with a strong industrial adhesive that felt tacky and cold against her skin. It was the tracker. The real shock wasn't just finding it. It was the chilling realization of where it was. Hidden deep inside the wheel well, not just tossed into a pocket or glove box. It was intentionally concealed. This was a professional job. This took time and planning. She stood up, the small, innocent-looking device heavy in her palm. The whole trip, the entire 2,847 miles of freedom she thought she was buying herself, had been a lie. Sydney's hands shook as she used a key to scrape the dirt off the device. The motion made a quiet, sharp grating noise. She had to get the serial number. She turned her phone, the flashlight beam catching the tiny letters. She took a photo, the phone's flash painfully bright in the darkness. This serial number was the only piece of proof she had. She didn't see a name. The device didn't tell her who owned it, but she didn't need to see a name. A sickening, terrible suspicion was already forming. There was only one person in the world who would do this. One person she was driving 2,847 miles to escape. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight into the empty, fluorescent-lit lobby and demanded the motel phone. Her own cell felt tainted, like it was his. The voice on the other end of the line was a local police dispatcher. Sydney spoke clearly, laying out the facts, the move, the X, the Airtag, and the serial number she had photographed. They told her to stay put. Just wait for an officer to arrive and bring the evidence. The wait in that motel room was torture. Every passing car on the highway, every door slammed down the hall made her jump. She stood at the window, pulling the cheap curtain back just an inch. Every set of headlights that swept into the parking lot made her heart hammer. Was it the police? Or was it him? She kept the Airtag locked in the safe, a tiny ticking time bomb of proof. The room's air conditioner kicked on with a loud clank, making her flinch. The minutes dragged. The silence between the sounds was almost worse. When the police arrived, that tracker became Exhibit A. It was hard, undeniable proof. The officer took the device and secured it in a clear plastic bag with a sharp official snap. That little serial number, the one Sydney had quickly photographed in the dark, became the key. It gave the authorities what they needed. They were able to use that serial number to secure a legal warrant. They went straight to Apple, who confirmed the tracking information and, with the warrant, confirmed the owner. The device was directly linked to Ethan's Apple ID. Her worst fear was confirmed. The whole digital picture was laid bare. A map of Sydney's entire cross-country journey. Every stop logged, every moment of supposed safety recorded. The court had what it needed. Ethan was formally charged with stalking. It was not a warning, it was a criminal charge. A few weeks later, with the court case underway, Sydney was granted the protection she had initially tried to buy with gasoline and distance. She received a 5-year restraining order. It was a legal barrier, a piece of paper that put a wall between her and the person who had tried to follow her ghost. Sydney finally made it to New York. The SUV, the furniture, the boxes, it all made it. But the memory of that small, round, white disc, hidden in the grease and shadows of her own car, never left her. Every time she got out of a vehicle, she had to stop herself from checking the wheel wells. She learned that modern terror doesn't need a monster in the woods. It just needs a piece of inexpensive technology, a cheap motel parking lot, and the face of someone you used to trust. For 5 days in the wilderness, someone knew exactly where she was. Callie needed a break. Her life as a freelance writer was a constant noise of email pings and digital alerts. She craved quiet. So she planned a 5-day trip on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia. She was a planner. Every piece of gear was checked, every mile calculated. Her plan was all about control. She parked her car at the final destination lot, a 5-day hike away, and had a friend drop her off at the starting trailhead. The most important piece of gear was her phone. Before she tucked it deep into her waterproof bag, she shut it all down. Airplane mode. Do not disturb. She made herself deaf to the world. She locked it away, ready for 5 days of total silence. What she didn't know was that she had also made herself deaf to the only warning that mattered. See, someone else was a planner too. Someone had stitched a tiny coin-sized tracking device, an Airtag, into the inner lining of her new blue backpack. The work was expert. The thread matched. It was invisible. A perfect piece of sabotage. The moment Callie set foot on the trailhead, smiling like someone who thinks they've covered every angle, the timer started. That little tracker began its silent, steady work. It sent out a quiet Bluetooth ping. Every time a hiker with a modern phone passed within range, the device used that passerby's phone to relay its location. Here's the thing about the warning, the one that tells you an Airtag is moving with you. It needs a data signal to work. It has to check a server to see if the tag is a threat. But Callie was in a total dead zone. Her phone, sealed in its bag, was blind. Her own hunt for peace had created the perfect digital trap. The first 2 days were exactly what she wanted. Callie moved through the green woods. The only sound was the steady crunch of her boots on pine needles. The air smelled like fresh earth and damp pine needles. The silence was a relief. The routine was broken late on day 2. When she set up camp, she saw something that made her pause. She always put her knife sheath in the same mesh pocket, handle up. It was a safety rule, but the sheath was not in the pocket. It was lying sideways on the ground, right outside her tent flap. There had been no wind. She picked it up, confused, her mind racing. She tried to dismiss it. "I'm just tired," she told herself. "I'm not thinking straight." She slipped up, but the incident settled in the back of her mind. It wouldn't dissolve. Day 3 brought a deeper chill. She stopped for lunch beside a stream. The water was loud, a constant rush over stones that filled the whole valley. As she looked for a spot to sit, she saw them, a pair of boot prints in the damp earth just a few feet away. They were distinct. They were not her prints. What really stopped her breath was how clean they were, not muddy, not scuffed. They looked like someone had stood there, waited, and then stepped backwards, wiping their soles before moving on. The hair rose on the back of her neck. She stood frozen. She listened. Nothing. Just the rush of the water. She scanned the empty trail, her heart hammering. She tried to push the anxiety down. This was a public trail. It had to be another hiker. But her gut argued back. It was too precise, too careful. She started moving faster, her hiking poles striking the ground with a frantic, uneven click. Clack, as her steady rhythm broke. That night, she broke her own rules. She pulled out the phone and disabled airplane mode. She was desperate for a signal, for a single bar to call her sister, just to hear a familiar voice. She stared at the screen, waiting. Nothing. No service. Her attempt to fix things had failed. She was in a perfect, inescapable silence. Meanwhile, miles away, the digital ghost knew everything. The Airtag continued its perfect communication. Every 2 hours, every time an outside signal passed, the stalker's map was updated. It showed Callie's exact location, her direction of travel, and the precise moment she stopped for the night. The stalker wasn't chasing her. They were observing a captive in motion. On day 4, the anxiety turned into a raw feeling of being watched. She kept turning her head, listening for a snap of a branch or the rustle of movement in the brush. She heard nothing but her own heavy breathing and the natural chirp of unseen insects. But the feeling was so strong it made her skin crawl. She ate her food cold, barely tasting it. She barely slept, her ears straining for any sound in the dark. She packed up before the sun was fully up. She had to move, to put distance between herself and the invisible companion. She tripped twice on day 4, catching herself each time with a gasp of fear that sounded loud in the quiet woods. She decided to stick to her original exit plan. The only safe spot was the end of the line. The thought of quitting scared her less than the thought of staying. She pushed herself into a jog on the flatter parts of the trail, the only sound the heavy thud-thud-thud of her feet as she ran. She felt like an animal running from a scent it couldn't place. The end of the trip felt like a mad dash. She was exhausted, scratched up, but alive. When she finally saw the familiar shape of her car in the destination lot, a wave of profound relief washed over her. She threw open the door, sank into the driver's seat, and locked the door. The heavy clunk of the lock was a promise of safety. She let out a breath she'd been holding for 2 days, her hands shaking. She reached for the phone. This was the moment of full contact. With a shaky hand, she finally disabled airplane mode. The phone immediately connected to the nearest network tower, a quick beep of success. It started processing 5 days' worth of data. She was ready for the flood of missed texts and work emails. What she got instead was one single surgical notification. Airtag detected. An unknown Airtag has been traveling with you for 120 hours. Location alert. Trailhead parking. The world froze. All the air left her lungs. The fear wasn't a monster in the woods. It was a tiny piece of plastic in her own bag. The 5 days of solitude she thought she'd won were actually 5 days of complete surveillance. She had been led on a walk. Frantic, she ripped the pack from the seat. She found the inner lining, the perfect stitching, and used her keys to tear the fabric with a loud RIP. She pulled out the small, silent disc. It was a cold piece of technology, now a weapon, a clear sign that someone had been with her every single step. The Airtag just lay in her hand, inert, terrifying. The local police were out of their depth. This was not a physical assault. This was cyberstalking with a physical tool. The interstate nature of the Airtag's data immediately flagged the case. It went to the FBI. Agent Bruce, a man who dealt with digital crime, confirmed the facts. The Airtag logs were solid. The monitoring had been constant. The owner was a ghost, an unknown Apple ID, a burner account that led to nothing. The physical stalker was never seen, never caught. Just a digital ghost, a burner account. The case was filed as open. As of October 2024, it's still open. But the final terrifying detail was what kept Callie up at night. The Airtag stopped reporting the moment she reached her car. The stalker didn't lose her. They chose to end the tracking exactly when she returned to civilization. It wasn't a failure of the device. It was a message. I let you go. She saw him everywhere. Her coffee shop, her gym, her apartment. Then her iPhone explained why. Kira was a student at the University of Michigan. Just 21, she lived with that easy feeling of safety you have when you're young and connected. She knew bad things happened, sure, but they were stories you read about online. Her world was different. It was lit up, it was busy, and you knew what was coming next. That all fractured on a Friday night in late fall. She was at a college bar, one of the popular ones, packed wall to wall. She was inside that loud, warm wave of 100 people talking at once. You could feel the muffled, thumping bass of the music as it pushed right up through the floorboards. It felt safe because it was public. It felt safe because everyone was there. She took off her thick, dark jacket and, without a second thought, slung it over the back of her wooden chair. She was turned, laughing, lost in a story a friend was telling. In that single moment of distraction, a shadow moved behind her. A man. He passed through the chaos with a kind of surgical quiet. Nobody saw him. Nobody registered the movement. He slipped a hand down and, in one smooth, practiced motion, dropped a small, white, cold piece of plastic deep into the lining of her pocket. He was gone before the noise, and the crowd could even swallow him up. A digital chain had been locked on. The trap was set. It started as a feeling she couldn't quite name, just a faint, nagging itch under her skin. She'd look over her shoulder, expecting to see something, and there would be nothing. Just the empty street, just a feeling that was wrong. Then she started seeing the same face. It wasn't a scary face, that was the problem. It was just a guy. Neutral. Forgettable. And he was always on the edge of her vision. The first time was at her favorite coffee shop. She was waiting for her order, and he was just standing across the street, looking down at his phone like any other person. She dismissed it. It's a busy campus. It's a coincidence. But the coincidences started to stack up. The next time was near the campus gym. She'd just finished, pushing her way out, listening to the high-pitched squeak of the heavy glass door as it sighed shut behind her. She looked up. There he was again. This time walking down the pavement on the other side, moving in the opposite direction. He didn't even look at her. A second sighting wasn't a coincidence. It was a question. By the end of the first week, that question had turned into a deep, heavy certainty. Her college routine, the most predictable, boring part of her life, had become a roadmap for someone else. She started a new note in her phone. She started writing it all down, tracking the events, tracking him. The pattern was relentless. 14 different locations in 2 weeks. She would leave her apartment building in the morning, hearing the familiar metallic clunk of the heavy outer door as it latched shut. And there he would be, Sometimes he was in a parked car down the block, engine off. Sometimes he was just walking past, head down. He was never aggressive. He never spoke. He never even made eye contact. He just was. And that was the true horror. He wasn't trying to scare her. He wasn't trying to start a fight. He was simply confirming a schedule. He was documenting her life. This casual, almost boring presence made her doubt her own mind. She'd sit in her apartment, staring at the list on her phone. Am I stressed? Am I just seeing things now? Is my brain playing tricks on me? This self-doubt was the stalker's true weapon. It was the feeling that reality itself was betraying her. The paranoia built until it became a physical weight in her chest. Every text message she got felt like a trap. Every call felt monitored. She would sit in her quiet apartment at night, forcing herself to study, but all she was doing was listening. Listening to the old creak of the building settling around her. Listening to the distant, lonely wail of a passing siren, wondering if that man was just outside, listening too. Then, 2 weeks after that night at the bar, the truth arrived. It didn't come as a fist on the door or a face in the window. It came as a sudden, shrill ping from her own phone. Kira was just scrolling through an app, trying to feel normal for a few minutes. Her screen suddenly went dark. A notification, stark and chilling, appeared in the center of the display. It was a digital intrusion, a warning from her own device. Airtag found moving with you. The words were simple, but they were an absolute indictment of her last 14 days. Her body immediately went cold, then hot. She knew. She knew exactly where it had to be. She scrambled for her dark jacket, the one from that night, her fingers fumbling, shaking so hard she could barely make a fist. She ran them deep into the pocket, pushing past the seam in the lining, until her fingernails hit something small and round. It was cold. It was smooth. A small white plastic circle, the physical proof of her fear. She pulled it out, staring at it in her palm. In her other hand, the phone's screen updated. The terror was replaced by a sick, intellectual realization. The alert confirmed the Airtag had been with her for 14 days. It offered her an encrypted map history of its travels. She clicked on the map. Her breath stopped. The cold blue dots on the screen matched up, one for one, with the handwritten notes in her phone. The coffee shop, the gym, the street outside her apartment. The man hadn't been a coincidence. He hadn't been an illusion. He had been an observer. His movements were tied to hers by this tiny, malicious device. She realized she hadn't been looking at a man who was following her. She had been looking at a man who already knew where she was going. Kira took the tracking device and the damning digital data to the police. They saw the map. They saw her notes. And they moved with a speed that spoke to the gravity of the crime. Using the Airtag's precise location history, they tracked the observer's final, most recent activity. The capture was as chilling as the discovery. The police tracked the man, who they identified as the observer, and found him. He wasn't miles away. He was lying in wait, in his vehicle, in her very own apartment complex parking lot. The pattern of surveillance was leading to an inevitable, dark conclusion. The police had, mercifully, interrupted it. The investigation that followed revealed a horror deeper than Kira could have imagined. During a search, they found digital photo evidence and a meticulous logged journal. Kira was not the first. He had targeted other women from the same bar, logging their movements. With this digital voyeurism, he captured these women in their most intimate moments, documenting their daily lives. The journal was a cold, analytical record of lives he had invaded. He had been a clinical voyeur. He never interacted, not physically, not until he decided to escalate, lying in wait for Kira. The act was not one of passion or rage. It was one of calculated, absolute control. The observer was charged with aggravated stalking and unlawful electronic monitoring. This wasn't some minor charge. It reflected his prior history of digital voyeurism. The court understood the violation. He was found guilty and received a severe punishment, a 2-year prison sentence, followed by mandatory GPS monitoring upon his release. The case was a stark confirmation. Digital tracking wasn't a prank. It was a serious invasion that shattered a person's life. Time passed. The arrest, the trial, the conviction, it all became a blur. Kira did her best to begin rebuilding her life. She changed her routines. She moved apartments. Gradually, the suffocating fear began to subside. She thought she was safe. It was around the time of her birthday when she'd finally allowed herself to feel a sense of recovery. She was home alone, the afternoon light streaming through the window, when she heard the familiar rattle and clatter of the mail slot. Among the typical junk mail and generic cards was one envelope that stood out. It was plain white, unmarked, no return address. It was completely anonymous. Every muscle in her body tensed. A cold wave of recognition, the echo of that 2-week terror, washed over her. With a trembling hand, she tore the paper. Inside, there was no note, no card, no message of apology. There were only 2 things. The first was a brand new, unactivated Apple Airtag, a twin to the device that had started her nightmare. It was silent, smooth, and utterly menacing. The second was a single small piece of paper. The handwritten message was only 2 words. It simply read, "Happy birthday."